The phone rang 3 times before Blake Thornton noticed it, vibrating across his mahogany desk. He frowned at the interruption, his eyes still fixed on the quarterly report spread before him. It was nearly midnight, and the Dallas skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office at Thornton Energy Solutions. As CEO, his time was precious, especially with the merger announcement scheduled for tomorrow morning. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe and write in the comments where you are watching from, because as for me, I made this video all the way from California. Now back to our story. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. He almost declined the call, but something, intuition perhaps, made him reach for it. "Blake Thornton speaking," he answered, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had become second nature over the years. "Mr. Thornton?" The woman's voice was professional, clinical. "This is Nurse Ramirez from Baylor University Medical Center. I'm calling regarding Shelby Hayes. You're listed as her only emergency contact." Blake's hand tightened around the phone. Shelby Hayes, his executive assistant for the past 2 years. Efficient, brilliant, private. Always the first to arrive and the last to leave, except for today. She had called in sick this morning, something she had never done before. "What happened?" he asked, already reaching for a suit jacket draped over the chair. Miss Hayes was brought in after collapsing in her apartment. Her neighbor called 911. She's stable but unconscious. The doctors are running tests. The nurse paused. "Sir, are you a relative?" "No," Blake replied, feeling strangely out of his depth. "I'm her employer." "I see." The pause on the other end spoke volumes. "Well, she has no family listed in her records. You're the only contact we found." Blake stood by the window, looking down at the city streets 30 floors below. Shelby had worked alongside him day after day, managing his impossible schedule, anticipating his needs, becoming indispensable to his success. Yet he realized with a pang of guilt that he knew almost nothing about her personal life. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, ending the call. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and despair. Blake strode through the emergency department, out of place in his $3,000 suit and Italian leather shoes. He hadn't bothered with his driver. Something about this situation felt too personal, too urgent for protocol. At the nurse's station, a woman in blue scrubs looked up. "Mr. Thornton? I'm Nurse Ramirez. Thank you for coming so quickly." She led him to a small room where Shelby lay motionless under harsh fluorescent lights. Her chestnut hair was spread across the pillow, her face pale against the white sheets. Various machines beeped steadily around her. Without her usual professional demeanor and crisp attire, she looked smaller, vulnerable, in a way that made his chest tighten uncomfortably. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, remaining by the doorway. A doctor appeared beside him, chart in hand. "Dr. Chen," she introduced herself with a quick handshake. "We're still determining that. Initial tests show severe anemia and exhaustion. There's evidence of significant weight loss over a short period. Has she been under unusual stress recently?" Blake almost laughed. The merger had consumed every waking hour for months. Of course she had been under stress. They all had. But he suddenly recalled how Shelby had looked increasingly tired these past weeks, how her blazer seemed to hang more loosely on her frame. He had been too preoccupied to really notice. "The merger," he murmured, "but this seems extreme." Dr. Chen studied him carefully. "We're running more comprehensive tests. There's a possibility this goes beyond simple exhaustion. Does Miss Hayes have any medical conditions you're aware of?" He shook his head, feeling increasingly useless. "I don't know." The admission stung his pride. He prided himself on knowing everything about his business. Yet here was someone central to its operation, someone he spent more hours with than anyone else in his life, and he knew nothing of significance about her. Mr. Thornton, Nurse Ramirez said gently, perhaps you could check her apartment for medication or information that might help us. As her emergency contact, you could— I'm just her boss, he interrupted, more sharply than intended. I don't have keys to her home. The silence that followed made him uncomfortable. He approached Shelby's bedside, looking down at her still form. 2 years of working closely together, and yet the woman before him was essentially a stranger. She knew everything about him, his preferences, his schedule, the names of his family members, even how he took his coffee. But what did he know about her? Sir, Dr. Chin said, interrupting his thoughts, we found something concerning in her initial blood work. We need to do more tests, but there are markers that suggest a possible serious condition. It would help to know her medical history. Blake's mind raced. Shelby's personnel file would have basic medical information, but nothing detailed. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found what he needed. Knox, he said when his head of security answered. I need you to do something immediately. He explained the situation and what he needed, then ended the call. My team will get you her medical records from our HR department, he told the doctor. As dawn broke over Dallas, Blake found himself still at the hospital, having canceled his morning meetings with a brief email to the board. Shelby remained unconscious, though the doctors now had more information from the records his team had sent over. Mr. Thornton, Dr. Chin approached, looking grave. We have her results. It's not good news. Blake straightened in the uncomfortable plastic chair. Tell me. Miss Hayes has a rare form of leukemia. It appears she was diagnosed 6 months ago and has been undergoing treatment but recently stopped. According to these records, she was participating in a clinical trial but withdrew 3 weeks ago. The revelation hit Blake like a physical blow. 6 months. She had been fighting cancer for 6 months, all while managing the most demanding job at his company. Never once had she mentioned it. Never asked for time off beyond her scheduled treatment days, which she must have disguised as routine appointments. Why would she stop treatment? He asked, more to himself than the doctor. Dr. Chin hesitated. Sometimes patients make these decisions for various reasons. Side effects, financial concerns, loss of hope. Financial concerns. The words echoed in his mind. Thornton Energy Solutions provided excellent health insurance, but experimental treatments were often excluded. And Shelby, with no family to support her, had she been silently struggling while working at his side? As he watched her lying there, Blake Thornton, a man accustomed to having answers and solutions for everything, felt something unfamiliar. Helplessness. And beneath that, something even more foreign. A sense of personal failure. His phone buzzed with messages about the merger, about the board meeting he should be heading to right now. For the first time in his career, Blake Thornton didn't care. Something more important demanded his attention. A mystery he needed to solve. A debt he suddenly felt he owed. Why was he, of all people, Shelby Hayes' only emergency contact? And what else had she been hiding behind that efficient professional smile? As morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, Blake found himself studying Shelby's face. In the office, she was always in motion, typing rapidly, speaking concisely into her headset, navigating between tasks with precision. Seeing her this still was disconcerting. A nurse had explained that they were keeping her sedated while they stabilized her condition and developed a treatment plan. His phone buzzed again. The board. He silenced it without answering. Instead, he called Caroline Park, his vice president of operations. I need you to handle the board meeting, he told her when she answered. Family emergency. The words felt strange in his mouth. In 15 years of business, he had never used that excuse. Of course, Caroline replied, surprise evident in her voice. Is everything okay with your parents? Your sister? It's not my family, he said. I'll explain later. Just tell the board I'll reschedule. After ending the call, Blake approached the nurse's station. "I'd like to speak with Miss Hayes' oncologist." An hour later, Dr. Pierce Warren arrived, a serious man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes. They spoke in a small consultation room where Blake learned the brutal details of Shelby's condition. "Acute myeloid leukemia, an aggressive form," Dr. Warren explained. "The clinical trial showed initial promise. Her cancer was responding, but then she withdrew suddenly." "Why?" Blake demanded. "If it was working." "That's what I asked," Dr. Warren sighed. "She said she couldn't continue, but didn't elaborate. I suspected financial concerns, though she denied it. The trial covered the experimental treatment, but not all associated costs. Even with insurance, cancer is expensive. Miss Hayes lives alone, has no family support. Working through treatment is incredibly difficult." Blake's mind raced back through the past 6 months. Had there been signs he'd missed? Shelby had taken occasional afternoons off, appointments, she'd called them, but always made up the time. She'd grown thinner, yes, but he'd attributed that to stress. She had been drinking more tea instead of coffee. A health kick, he'd assumed. All these little changes that he'd barely registered now formed a devastating pattern. "What are her options now?" Blake asked. Dr. Warren's expression was grim. "Her condition has deteriorated significantly since stopping treatment. She needs to restart immediately, possibly with a more aggressive approach. There's another trial at MD Anderson in Houston that might be appropriate." "Cost isn't an issue," Blake stated firmly. "Whatever she needs, I'll cover it." Dr. Warren studied him curiously. "May I ask your relationship to Miss Hayes? You're her employer, correct?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, she's my executive assistant." "I see." The doctor's tone suggested he found this level of employer concern unusual. "Well, first we need to stabilize her and see if she's still eligible for advanced treatments. And of course, these will be her decisions to make when she regains consciousness." After Dr. Warren left, Blake found himself at a loss. Business problems he could solve with decisive action and strategic thinking. This was different. He pulled out his phone and called Knox again. "I need more information on Shelby Hayes," he said. "Personal history, family background, financial situation, everything." He hesitated, aware he was invading her privacy, but pressed on. "And I want to see her apartment." 3 hours later, Blake stood outside a modest apartment building in Oak Cliff, far from the luxury high-rise where he lived in uptown Dallas. Knox had obtained a key from the building superintendent after explaining the medical emergency. Shelby's one-bedroom apartment was small but neat, decorated simply with second-hand furniture and a few carefully chosen prints of Texas landscapes. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with classics and modern fiction. A desk in the corner held a laptop and a stack of medical bills partially hidden under a folder. The kitchen was minimal, the refrigerator nearly empty except for some yogurt and wilting vegetables. Blake moved through the space feeling like an intruder. This was Shelby's private world, one she had never mentioned at work. No photos of family adorned the walls or shelves, confirming what her emergency contact status had suggested. She was alone. The only personal touch was a small collection of potted plants on the windowsill, now drooping from lack of water. He watered the plants, then turned his attention to the desk. The folder contained medical bills, insurance claim forms, and correspondence regarding the clinical trial. Some bills were marked past due. Others showed payment plans with small monthly amounts. Blake did a quick calculation. Even with Thornton Energy's insurance coverage, Shelby's out-of-pocket expenses were substantial, and the unpaid time off for treatments would have cut into her salary. His phone buzzed with a text from Knox. "Background info ready. Sensitive material. Call when private." Blake sat on Shelby's modest sofa and made the call. What Knox told him over the next 20 minutes transformed his understanding of the woman who had worked alongside him for 2 years. Shelby Hayes had grown up in foster care after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. No siblings, no extended family who stepped forward. She had put herself through college at UT Austin with scholarships and loans, graduating with honors. Before joining Thornton Energy, she had worked for 3 other companies, each position showing steady advancement. Her credit score was excellent, despite modest income and student loans. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. And sir, Knox added, she volunteers at a literacy program for foster kids every other Saturday, has done so for 5 years. Blake thought back to all the weekend work he had demanded over the past 2 years. The time Shelby had rescheduled her personal commitments without complaint to accommodate his needs. How many of those commitments had been volunteer work? How many had been medical treatments? One more thing, Knox said. Her lease is up for renewal next month. There's an eviction warning for late payment dated 3 days ago. After ending the call, Blake sat in the growing darkness of Shelby's apartment. The woman he thought he knew, the competent, unflappable professional who managed his business life with seamless efficiency, was fighting cancer alone, facing financial ruin and eviction, all while maintaining a perfect professional facade. He recalled a conversation from months ago after a particularly demanding client meeting. "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" he had asked her casually while they shared a rare elevator ride alone. "Practice," she had replied with that slight smile of hers. "When you've weathered real storms, office turbulence feels manageable." He had nodded, assuming she meant previous high-stress jobs. Now the comment took on new meaning. His phone rang again. The hospital. Shelby was awake. When Blake returned to Baylor, he found Shelby sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice raspy from the breathing tube they had removed. "You didn't need to come. I'm so sorry about the meeting." "Stop," he interrupted, astonished that her first thought was about work. "The meeting doesn't matter." She looked confused, then embarrassed as understanding dawned. "They called you? I never thought. The form asked for an emergency contact years ago, and I didn't have anyone else to list. I never updated it. I never thought they'd actually call you." Blake took a seat beside her bed. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick, Shelby?" She looked down at her hands. "It wasn't relevant to my work performance." "Not relevant?" He struggled to keep his voice even. "You've been fighting cancer alone for 6 months while working 60-hour weeks. You stopped treatment because of money issues. How is that not relevant?" Her head snapped up. "How did you?" She stopped, a flash of anger crossing her face. "You had me investigated?" "I needed to understand what was happening," Blake said, not apologizing. "You collapsed. The doctors needed information." Shelby closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her professional mask was back in place. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Thornton, but my personal matters are my own responsibility. I'll submit my resignation, of course. You'll need someone reliable in my position." Blake stared at her in disbelief. Here she was, barely conscious after a medical emergency, and she was offering her resignation. The pride, the self-sufficiency, the absolute refusal to appear vulnerable. He recognized these traits because they mirrored his own. "Shelby," he said finally, using her first name perhaps for the first time. "Why am I your emergency contact?" The real reason. The question hung between them, unexpected and revealing. For a moment, her composure cracked. "Because there's no one else," she said softly, the simple truth laying bare the reality of her life. There's never been anyone else. 3 days later, Blake sat in his home office overlooking Turtle Creek, staring at a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with Thornton Energy. He had created a detailed analysis of Shelby's medical options, cost, and potential outcomes, approaching her illness as he would any business problem, with thorough research and strategic planning. His phone rang. It was Diane Morgan, his merger partner, for the 5th time that day. "Blake," she said when he finally answered, "the board is getting nervous. We need to finalize this deal. What's going on?" He rubbed his eyes. "Personal matter, Diane. I need another week." "A week? The shareholders are waiting. The press is speculating. This isn't like you." "1 week," he repeated firmly. "Caroline has everything under control." After ending the call, Blake returned to his research. Shelby had been transferred to MD Anderson yesterday against her protest. He had pulled strings, called in favors, and secured her a spot in the advanced treatment program Dr. Warren had mentioned. When she had objected to the cost, Blake had simply overridden her concerns. "Consider it an investment in a valuable employee," he had told her, knowing the corporate language would resonate with her professional pride. The truth was more complicated. In the days since her collapse, Blake had been forced to confront uncomfortable realizations about himself, his company, and the woman who had seamlessly managed his life while hers fell apart. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thornton, Knox is here." Knox entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "I've completed the additional research you requested, sir." Blake took the file and opened it. Inside was information about long-term cancer survival rates, medical leave policies at competing firms, and most importantly, details on Thornton Energy's own health insurance coverage. "Is this accurate?" Blake asked, pointing to a highlighted section detailing coverage limitations for experimental treatments. "Yes, sir. Our plan specifically excludes Phase 1 clinical trials and caps coverage for Phase 2 at $50,000. Miss Hayes' treatment costs have far exceeded that." Blake clenched his jaw. "And our medical leave policy?" 12 weeks unpaid under FMLA, then termination if the employee cannot return to full duties. Standard corporate policy. Knox hesitated. Miss Hayes never filed for medical leave. She used vacation days for her treatments. Blake remembered approving those vacation requests, sometimes grudgingly when they conflicted with important meetings. Never once had Shelby explained why she needed those specific days. "Thank you, Knox. That will be all." After Knox left, Blake made a series of calls to his company's benefits administrator, to his personal attorney, and finally to the Thornton Energy Board secretary. By evening, he had a plan. At MD Anderson the next morning, Blake found Shelby sitting up in bed, her laptop open, despite the doctor's orders to rest. She quickly closed it when he entered. "Mr. Thornton, you didn't need to visit again," she said, her professional tone at odds with her hospital gown and the colorful scarf covering her hair loss. "Blake," he corrected, setting down the paper bag he carried. "After all this, I think we're beyond formalities." She looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "Blake." He gestured to her laptop. "Working?" "Just emails, helping Caroline transition." She looked away. "I know I can't come back. My treatment schedule will be too intensive, and the side effects—" "Actually," he interrupted, "that's what I came to discuss." He pulled a chair closer to her bed. "I've been reviewing our company policies. They're inadequate." She looked confused. "I don't understand." "Our health insurance, our medical leave policy. They're designed for healthy people who occasionally get sick, not someone facing a serious illness." He leaned forward. "Did you know that only 8% of companies offer paid medical leave beyond standard disability? And that cancer patients are twice as likely to face bankruptcy as people without cancer?" Yes, I'm aware of the statistics." Of course she was, Blake realized. She had been living those statistics. "Shelby, I'm changing our company policies. Effective immediately, Thornton Energy will offer comprehensive coverage for all clinical trials, a catastrophic illness fund to cover additional expenses, and extended paid medical leave for serious conditions. Her eyes widened. That's generous, but the cost to the company is manageable, he finished. I've run the numbers. The impact on our bottom line will be minimal compared to the benefit for our employees. He paused. These changes won't just help you. They'll help everyone at the company who might face similar circumstances. Shelby studied him, clearly trying to understand his motivation. Why are you doing this? It was the question he'd been asking himself for days. The answer had come to him in the middle of the night, stark and uncomfortable. Because I built a company that valued profit over people, efficiency over compassion. And you, brilliant, private, resilient you nearly died rather than ask for help or special treatment. He opened the paper bag and pulled out a container of homemade soup. My housekeeper's recipe. She insists it has healing properties. Shelley accepted the container with a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen since this ordeal began. Thank you. As she ate, Blake broached the topic he'd been avoiding. The doctors tell me you're responding well to the new treatment, but recovery will take time, months, possibly a year. Shelby set down her spoon. I know. That's why I've prepared a comprehensive transition plan for my replacement. Caroline already has the file. I've documented all my procedures, contacts, preferences, everything you'll need. Blake shook his head, marveling at her efficiency even in crisis. I don't want to replace you. But you need an assistant who can— What I need, he interrupted gently, is for you to focus on getting well. I've hired a temporary assistant to handle day-to-day matters, but your position will be waiting when you're ready to return, whether that's 3 months or a year from now. Shelby's composure finally cracked. You can't just keep my job open indefinitely. The company will manage, Blake said firmly. Right now, your job is to fight this disease. That's all. Tears filled her eyes, and she looked away quickly, blinking them back. I don't know how to accept this kind of help. Blake understood then that her independence wasn't just pride. It was a survival mechanism. When no one had ever been there for her, she had learned to rely solely on herself. I know, he said quietly. Neither would I. 2 weeks later, Blake sat in the Thornton Energy boardroom facing his executive team and Diane Morgan's representatives. The merger discussions were back on track, though with modified terms. Blake had insisted on preserving the new health and leave policies as a non-negotiable condition, surprising everyone with his sudden focus on employee benefits. These changes will increase operating costs by approximately 2% annually, the CFO was explaining. But early projections suggest they may reduce turnover and increase productivity, potentially offsetting much of that cost over time. Blake was only half listening. His thoughts were with Shelby, who had been transferred to outpatient status yesterday. Against medical advice, she had insisted on returning to her Oak Cliff apartment rather than accepting Blake's offer of his rarely used guest house in Highland Park. Mr. Thornton? The CFO's voice broke into his thoughts. Do you have any additional comments before we vote? Blake looked around the table at the expectant faces. These people knew him as a ruthless businessman, someone who prioritized shareholder value above all else. The changes he was proposing ran counter to everything they thought they knew about him. Yes, he said, standing to address the room. For 15 years, I've built this company on the principle that business success comes from strategic thinking and decisive action. I still believe that. But recent events have shown me that our most valuable assets are not our patents or market share. They're our people. He thought of Shelby, who had given everything to her job while asking for nothing in return. This isn't just about doing what's right, though it is that. It's about recognizing that our employees' well-being directly impacts our success. We ask for their loyalty and dedication. We should offer the same in return. The board voted unanimously to approve the new policies. Afterward, Diane approached him privately. "That was quite a speech," she said. "Not what I expected from the Blake Thornton I've known for a decade. What changed?" Blake considered deflecting the question, but decided on honesty. "I discovered that someone I respect greatly was suffering right in front of me, and I never noticed. It made me question what else I've been missing." Diane studied him thoughtfully. "This is about your assistant, isn't it? The emergency that took you away from negotiations." "Shelby," he corrected. "Her name is Shelby Hayes." That evening, Blake found himself driving to Oak Cliff instead of heading home to his penthouse. He had called ahead, so Shelby was expecting him, though she had insisted she was fine and didn't need checking up on. He parked outside her building, noticing details he had missed on his first visit. The small playground across the street, the corner taqueria, the diverse mix of residents coming and going. Shelby's neighborhood was vibrant but modest, worlds away from his usual haunts. When she opened her door, he was struck by how different she looked in jeans and a simple sweater, her head covered with a patterned scarf. More human somehow, less the perfect professional. "You really didn't need to come all this way," she said, but stepped aside to let him in. "I brought dinner," he replied, holding up a bag from a nearby restaurant he'd researched, healthy options that would be gentle on her system. As they ate at her small kitchen table, Blake found himself sharing news about the office, the merger progress, even his frustration with the temporary assistant who organized everything differently. Shelby listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering suggestions or insights. "The board approved the new policies today," he told her. "They'll be implemented next month." "That's wonderful," she said, her eyes brightening. "It will make such a difference for so many people." Blake watched her as she spoke passionately about the impact these changes would have. In her own environment, discussing something that mattered to her, Shelby was animated and engaging in a way he had never seen at work. "Why did you never tell me about your volunteer work with foster kids?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, surprised by the change of subject. "It didn't seem relevant to my job." "I want to know," he said. "Tell me about it." As Shelby described her literacy program, her whole demeanor changed. This was her passion, he realized, helping children who were facing the same isolation she had experienced. "You could expand it," he said when she finished. "The Thornton Foundation could provide funding, resources." "No," she interrupted firmly. "I appreciate the offer, but that program is separate from our work relationship. It's important to me to keep it that way." Blake was startled by her refusal, but found himself respecting it. Shelby had built her life with clear boundaries, creating separate spaces where she maintained control. He, of all people, could understand that need. As he was leaving, Shelby handed him a small plant in a ceramic pot, one of the ones he had watered during his first visit to her apartment. "For your office," she said, "a reminder to water it weekly." The gesture touched him unexpectedly. It was both a thank you and a gentle reminder that living things required care and attention, a lesson he was only beginning to learn. "Shelby," he said, pausing at her door, "why did you really make me your emergency contact?" "The truth." She looked at him directly, her professional mask completely gone. "Because in 2 years working together, you never once missed a meeting. Never failed to follow through on a commitment. You're the most reliable person I've ever known." She smiled slightly. "I never thought they'd actually call you, but if they did, I knew you'd answer." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Blake stood at the podium of a Dallas hotel ballroom addressing the annual Thornton Energy Leadership Conference. The company had changed significantly since Shelby's diagnosis. Not just the new health policies, but a broader shift in corporate culture. "The merger with Morgan Energy has exceeded our financial projections for the third consecutive quarter," Blake was saying. But our most important metric isn't on your balance sheets. Employee retention has improved 23%. Productivity is up. Workplace satisfaction scores have reached an all-time high. He paused, scanning the room filled with managers from across the company. When people know they're valued, truly valued, they give their best. It's not complicated, but it took me too long to understand it. After the presentation, Blake checked his phone. No messages from Shelby, which meant things were proceeding as planned. Today marked her final treatment, a milestone they had both been anticipating. Though she remained on medical leave, they had developed a friendship over the past months that extended beyond their previous working relationship. Weekly dinners, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at his penthouse, had become a ritual neither would miss. He had watched her fight her disease with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. There had been setbacks, infections, complications, days when the pain and fatigue overwhelmed even her formidable will. Through it all, she had allowed him to help, though never without maintaining clear boundaries. "Mr. Thornton," Caroline approached him after the conference concluded. "Everything is arranged for this evening." "Thank you," he replied. "And the foundation paperwork?" "Finalized yesterday. The board approved the initial funding allocation. We can announce it whenever you're ready." Blake nodded, satisfied. The Thornton Foundation had existed for years as a tax vehicle with minimal charitable activity. Now it had a clear purpose and substantial resources behind it. Later that afternoon, Blake arrived at MD Anderson just as Shelby was completing her final treatment. She emerged from the treatment room looking tired but triumphant, a small bell in her hand. "They let me keep it," she explained, showing him the bell patients traditionally rang after their last session. "For good luck." "How does it feel?" he asked as they walked slowly toward the exit. "Surreal," she admitted. "After so long fighting this, it's strange to think about what comes next." In the car, Shelby was quieter than usual. Blake had expected celebration, but she seemed contemplative, almost melancholy. "Is everything all right?" he finally asked as they drove through Houston's sprawling suburbs. "Just thinking about tomorrow," she said, watching the city through the window. "About coming back to work. About getting back to normal." "There's no rush," Blake reminded her. "Your doctors recommended at least another month of recovery." "I know," she replied, "but I'm ready to reclaim my life, to get back to normal." Blake wasn't so sure about normal. Their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee, becoming something neither of them had clearly defined. The thought of returning to their former professional dynamic felt impossible now. "Actually," he said, "there's something I want to discuss before you come back." He had planned to wait until dinner, but her comment made him reconsider. "I've been thinking about restructuring your position." Shelby turned to him sharply. "Restructuring? I'd like to promote you to Director of Executive Operations. You'd oversee the executive office staff, including my new assistant, and take on more strategic projects. The role would offer more flexibility than your previous position, better compensation." "Stop," Shelby interrupted, an edge to her voice he'd rarely heard. "This is because of my illness, isn't it? You're creating a position that requires less of me because you don't think I can handle my old job." Blake was taken aback. "That's not— I don't want special treatment," she continued. "I've worked too hard to be seen as capable and reliable. I don't need to be protected or sheltered." "This isn't about protection," Blake insisted. "It's about recognizing your value. You've always been more than an assistant, Shelby. You understand this company, its people, its potential, in ways I'm only beginning to see." She didn't look convinced. "Then why now? Why not before I got sick?" The question hung between them, forcing Blake to confront an uncomfortable truth. "Because I didn't see you clearly before," he admitted. "I saw a function, not a person. I was wrong." The car pulled up outside a restaurant. Not the neighborhood place they usually visited in Oak Cliff, but an elegant establishment in the Arts District overlooking Clyde Warren Park. "This isn't my apartment," Shelby observed. "No," Blake agreed. "I thought we should celebrate your milestone somewhere special." He hesitated. "But if you'd rather go home, we can change plans." Shelby studied him for a moment, then shook her head. "No, this is fine. Just unexpected." Inside, they were led to a private dining room where a surprise awaited. Shelby stopped short in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. The room was filled with 24 people, her volunteer literacy program staff and several of the older students, doctors and nurses from her treatment team, and key members of Thornton Energy who had helped implement the new health policies. "What is this?" she whispered. "A celebration," Blake said simply. "For finishing treatment, yes, but also for everything you've accomplished and everyone you've helped along the way." For once, Shelby seemed at a loss for words. A teenage girl approached her first, one of her literacy program students, now a volunteer herself. "Miss Hayes," the girl said earnestly, "we missed you so much. The program hasn't been the same without you." One by one, people came forward to embrace Shelby, share stories, and express their gratitude and admiration. Blake watched from a distance, seeing her through others' eyes, as a mentor, a friend, a source of quiet strength and practical help. All roles he had never known about during their years working side by side. Dr. Warren approached Blake as the dinner was winding down. "This was a wonderful idea," the oncologist said. "Celebrating milestones is important in recovery." "How is she really doing?" Blake asked quietly. Dr. Warren's expression grew serious. "The treatment has been successful. Her latest tests show no detectable cancer. But with her type of leukemia, we'll need to monitor closely for at least 5 years. And the chances of recurrence? With continued monitoring and care, her prognosis is good." He studied Blake carefully. "She'll need a strong support system moving forward." "She has one now," Blake assured him. Later, as guests began departing, Shelby found Blake by the windows overlooking the park. "How you arranged all this," she said. It wasn't a question. "I had help," he acknowledged. "Caroline is surprisingly good at secret planning." Shelby shook her head in wonder. "I never expected any of this." She gestured to encompass not just the party, but everything that had happened since her collapse. "Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "It's not necessary," Blake replied. "But there's something else I wanted to discuss. The real reason for the promotion offer." He led her to a quiet corner and handed her a folder. Inside were details of the newly expanded Thornton Foundation, including its first major initiative, a comprehensive support program for foster children transitioning to adulthood, with educational scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship opportunities. "The foundation needs a director," Blake explained, "someone who understands both the business aspects and the human need. Someone with personal experience and professional skills." He met her gaze directly. "I want you to consider taking the position." Shelby stared at the proposal, clearly stunned. "This is substantial funding. $10 million initially, with a commitment for ongoing support." "Correct," Blake confirmed. "And complete operational independence. The foundation will have its own board, its own staff, its own offices." "You're serious?" Her voice held a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Completely," he assured her. "You once told me that helping those kids was your passion. Now you can do it on a scale that will make a real difference. Build something lasting." Shelby was silent for a long moment, processing the opportunity before her. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this?" Blake had asked himself the same question many times over the past months. The answer had evolved from guilt to respect to something deeper. "Because some investments have nothing to do with money," he said quietly. "I've built a successful company, but you've shown me that true value isn't measured in profit margins. It's measured in lives changed, in potential realized. He touched the small potted plant she had given him, now thriving in his office. A daily reminder of what required care and attention. I've learned that some things matter more than quarterly reports. You taught me that, Shelby. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. I need time to think about this. Of course, he agreed. Take all the time you need. The opportunity isn't going anywhere. 3 weeks later, Blake stood in the newly leased offices of the Thornton Foundation for Youth Advancement. The space was still empty except for a few pieces of furniture and stacks of moving boxes, but large windows offered spectacular views of downtown Dallas. Shelby walked through the door, her professional demeanor firmly in place, though her hair was still growing back, cropped short around her face. The illness had changed her physically, but there was a new confidence in her bearing that had nothing to do with her role as his assistant. "Well?" he asked, gesturing to the space. "Will it work?" Shelby nodded, a smile breaking through her business facade. "It's perfect. The location is accessible for the kids. There's room to grow." She turned to take in the view. "It feels like a fresh start." "Then it's yours," Blake said, handing her the keys. "Director Hayes." She accepted them with a small laugh. "I'm still getting used to that title." "You'll grow into it," he assured her. "You already have the most important qualification. You care deeply about the mission." They walked through the empty rooms together, discussing plans for the space and the programs Shelby wanted to implement. Her excitement was palpable as she described her vision for supporting foster youth through education, housing, and emotional support. "We'll need to hire staff," she was saying, "starting with a program coordinator and a case manager. Then—" She stopped mid-sentence, looking out the window at the city below. "Thank you, Blake, for seeing me, for believing in me, for all of this." He stood beside her, looking out at the same view. "You saved yourself, Shelby. I just made sure you had the resources to do it." She turned to him with that small, knowing smile. "You're wrong about that, but I'll let you believe it for now." 1 year later, Blake stood at the window of his corner office at Thornton Energy, looking out at the Dallas skyline he knew so well. On his desk sat a framed photo from the Thornton Foundation's first graduation ceremony. 23 foster youth who had completed their first year of college, all beaming with pride. Shelby stood among them, healthy and whole, her smile as bright as any of the students. His phone buzzed with a message from her. "Board meeting wrapped early. Coffee before your 2 p.m.? Blake smiled and typed back, "The usual place. I'll bring the plant food." It had become their running joke. Every month, Shelby gave him a new plant for his office, each one with increasingly complicated care instructions. His assistant complained about the watering schedule, but Blake secretly enjoyed the ritual. Each plant was a reminder of the lesson Shelby had taught him, that growth required attention, patience, and care. The Thornton Foundation was thriving under Shelby's leadership. In just 1 year, they had expanded from the initial foster youth program to include medical advocacy services, financial literacy courses, and a job placement network. Shelby had hired a staff of 12, all equally passionate about the mission. More importantly, she had thrived. Her latest scans continued to show no evidence of cancer. She had regained the weight she'd lost, and then some, her face glowing with health and purpose. She still maintained boundaries between her foundation work and their friendship, but those boundaries had softened over time. Blake grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. As he passed Caroline's office, his VP called out to him. "Blake, quick question about the quarterly projections. Can it wait until after 2? He asked. "I have a meeting." Caroline glanced at her calendar, confused. "You don't have anything scheduled until 2. "Personal appointment," Blake said with a small smile. "Some things are more important than projections." Caroline's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "Of course. We'll talk after. As Blake walked out of Thornton Energy into the bright Texas sunshine, he thought about the phone call that had changed everything. The midnight call that had revealed how little he knew about the people who made his success possible. The crisis that had forced him to confront his values and reshape his company. He had built an empire on efficiency and profit. Shelby had shown him how to build something that mattered. At the coffee shop, he found her already seated at their usual table by the window, 2 cups waiting. She looked up as he approached, and her smile was genuine and unguarded. The smile of someone who had fought for her life and won, who had built something meaningful from the ashes of crisis. "You're late," she said, teasing. "By 3 minutes," Blake protested, sitting across from her. "In the old days, you'd have been here 5 minutes early." "In the old days, I didn't know what mattered." He handed her a small bag. "New plant for your office. It's supposed to bloom in the spring." Shelby opened the bag and laughed. "A peace lily. Very symbolic." "I thought so." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city move around them. The lunch crowds, the business meetings, the endless hustle of Dallas life. "I got the final numbers for the scholarship program," Shelby said. "We're funding 35 students next year, up from 23 this year." "That's incredible." "And I wanted to tell you, we're getting inquiries from other companies about replicating our model. Apparently, word has spread about what Thornton Energy did with its health policies and the foundation." Blake smiled. "Good. It should spread. Every company should take care of its people the way we should have been doing all along." "You know," Shelby said thoughtfully, "a year ago, I was lying in a hospital bed thinking my life was over, thinking I'd failed. And now," she gestured around them, "now I'm doing work that matters, helping kids who are like me, building something that will outlast both of us." "You didn't fail," Blake said firmly. "You survived. There's a difference." "Only because someone finally saw me," she replied quietly. "Really saw me. Not just what I could do, but who I was." Blake held her gaze. "I should have seen you sooner." "Maybe," Shelby agreed. "But you saw me when it mattered most. That's what counts." His phone buzzed with a reminder about his 2 o'clock meeting. Blake glanced at it and silenced the phone. "Don't you need to go?" Shelby asked. "In a minute." He looked at her across the table. This woman who had almost died anonymously while working at his side, who had taught him the most important lesson of his career. "I wanted to tell you something. Caroline and I have been working on a proposal for the board. We want to roll out the Thornton model, the health policies, the foundation concept, the whole package, to other energy companies in Texas. Create an industry-wide standard for how we treat employees." Shelby's eyes widened. "Blake, that's ambitious." "It's necessary," he corrected. "And it's the right thing to do. I learned that from my executive assistant." He paused. "Former executive assistant. Current friend. Permanent reminder that profit without purpose is just numbers on a screen." Shelby reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You're going to change the whole industry." "We're going to change it," Blake corrected. "I need you on the advisory board. The foundation's perspective will be crucial." She pulled back, suddenly wary. "Blake, I can't be seen as trading on our personal relationship." "This isn't personal," he interrupted. "Well, it is, but not like that. You're the most qualified person I know to speak to what employees actually need. Your foundation serves the communities our industry impacts. You've lived through what happens when corporate policy fails people. Who better to help us fix it?" Shelby considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll do it, on one condition." "Name it." "We include mental health services in the package, not just catastrophic illness coverage. Real, comprehensive mental health support. Depression, anxiety, addiction, all of it." Blake smiled. "Already in the proposal," Caroline insisted. Then I'm in. They stood to leave, and as they walked out into the Dallas afternoon, Blake realized he couldn't pinpoint exactly when Shelby had stopped being his employee and started being the person whose opinion he valued most. Maybe it had been gradual, or maybe it had happened all at once on that midnight drive to the hospital. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he had answered the phone, that he had stayed, that he had chosen to see the person behind the professional facade. Some calls change everything. The trick is recognizing which ones matter enough to answer. As Blake walked back to his office, his phone buzzed with messages about the afternoon meeting, the quarterly projections, the endless details of running a company. But now, walking through the Dallas streets with the weight of purpose and friendship and hard-won wisdom, those messages felt different. They were still important, but they weren't everything. Shelby had taught him that. And that lesson, more than any merger or deal or profit margin, was the one that would define the rest of his career. The phone on Blake Thornton's desk had rung 3 times before he noticed it. But when he finally answered, everything changed. Not just for him, but for everyone his company touched. For every employee who would never face financial ruin while fighting for their life. For every foster kid who would get a chance to build a future instead of just surviving the present. One phone call, one choice to answer, one woman who had been invisible until she wasn't, and a CEO who learned that the best investment he ever made had nothing to do with energy or profit or power. It had everything to do with seeing people as more than the functions they served, with understanding that true success is measured in lives changed, not just dollars earned. Blake Thornton had built an empire. Shelby Hayes had taught him why it mattered, and that made all the difference. Thanks for being a part of Bimsy Stories family. Make sure you comment below and tell us where you are watching from.